The slap echoed through the auditorium, sharp enough to silence the applause mid-breath. On stage, a 9-year-old girl froze, trophy trembling in her small hands, her smile collapsing into confusion as heat rushed to her cheek. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Teachers stood, parents whispered, and a judge dropped her pen. No one understood why a grown woman had crossed the aisle or why pride had turned to rage so fast. What they didn't know was this moment would expose a lie, shatter a label, and summon the one witness who could not stay silent. Shayla Thompson lived a life no child should ever have to understand. In a house filled with noise, rules, and expectations, she was the quiet space everyone walked past. While her stepsister's room glowed with pink walls, new toys, and praise taped to the fridge, Shayla slept curled on a sagging couch, springs poking through like reminders that comfort was never meant for her. Every morning began the same. Before school, she folded laundry that wasn't hers, washed dishes she didn't dirty, and packed lunches she wouldn't eat. Her stepmother called it teaching responsibility. Shayla learned instead how to disappear. She learned how to nod without speaking, how to move softly, how to make herself small enough not to cause trouble. Her father was rarely home. He worked double shifts, chasing overtime and promises of things will be better soon. When he did come back, exhaustion sat heavier on him than guilt. Shayla never complained. She believed love meant not adding to someone's burden, even if it meant carrying the weight alone. At school, Shayla was different. Still quiet, but not invisible. Words made sense to her in a way people never had. Letters lined up obediently, spelling rules followed logic, and dictionaries felt like friends that never raised their voices. She borrowed books from the library and read them twice before returning them, afraid to ask for more. At night, while the house slept, Shayla whispered words to herself like prayers. She traced letters in the air, practiced spellings under her breath, and imagined a place where being smart didn't make her a threat. No one called her gifted. No one noticed the way her eyes lit up when she learned a new word. But words noticed her. They stayed with her when no one else did. And slowly, quietly, they became her shield, a secret strength growing in the shadows, waiting for the moment it would finally be seen. Despite the hunger that gnawed at her stomach and the exhaustion that lived in her bones, Shayla was brilliant. Not the loud kind that demanded attention, but the steady kind that survived in silence. Her mind stayed sharp even when her body felt small. She memorized spelling rules the way other children memorize cartoons, turning prefixes and suffixes into puzzles she could solve when the world felt unsolvable. Books became her escape. The school library was the only place where no one asked her to hurry, clean, or explain herself. Between those shelves, Shayla was not invisible. She was a traveler, a thinker, a child allowed to wonder. She read during lunch instead of eating, not because she didn't want food, but because stories filled a different kind of emptiness. Her most prized possession was a worn-out dictionary with a cracked spine and yellowed pages. It had belonged to her mother, who passed away when Shayla was very young. Shayla barely remembered her voice, but she remembered sitting beside her on the floor, being taught how words worked. That dictionary was the last proof that someone had once looked at her and seen something worth nurturing. At night, she hid it beneath the couch cushion. Some pages were loose, corners folded, definitions underlined in a careful child's hand. Shayla treated it like a treasure, like something sacred. When the house grew quiet, she opened it slowly, as if afraid the words might escape if she moved too fast. School was the one place where Shayla felt almost normal. She still wore hand-me-downs and spoke softly, but her answers were always right. Her teacher, Mrs. Alvarez, noticed early on. It wasn't just that Shayla spelled words correctly. It was how she understood them. She asked questions. She stayed after class to learn why rules existed, not just how to follow them. Mrs. Alvarez saw resilience where others saw silence. She saw hunger, not for attention, but for opportunity. And behind Shayla's politeness, she saw fire. One afternoon, after class, Mrs. Alvarez stopped Shayla at the door and asked her to spell a word far beyond grade level. Shayla hesitated, eyes dropping to the floor, then spelled it perfectly. Then another, and another. Mrs. Alvarez smiled, a real smile, the kind Shayla wasn't used to receiving. "Have you ever heard of a spelling bee?" she asked. Shayla nodded. She'd seen one once on television at a neighbor's house. Children standing on stage, confident and proud, holding trophies like proof that they mattered. "There's a regional one coming up," Mrs. Alvarez said gently. "I think you should try." Hope arrived quietly, like a fragile thing unsure if it was welcome. Shayla didn't speak right away. She had learned not to trust good ideas. They usually came with consequences. At home, when she mentioned it, her stepmother laughed. Not a soft laugh, a sharp one. "We already have a gifted child in this family," she said, glancing at her daughter. "Don't get ideas above your place." Shayla nodded, as she always did. But the hope didn't leave. Mrs. Alvarez arranged extra practice during lunch. She printed word lists, encouraged Shayla, and never once made her feel like she was asking for too much. For the first time, someone invested time in her without expecting repayment. Shayla practiced everywhere. While sweeping floors, she recited definitions. While walking to school, she spelled words in her head. Hunger made her dizzy sometimes, but words kept her steady. Exhaustion slowed her body, but her mind stayed awake. The night before the competition, Shayla opened her mother's dictionary and found a note written inside the cover. She had never noticed it before. Asterisk words are doors. Learn them, and you can go anywhere. Asterisk. Shayla pressed the book to her chest and cried silently, careful not to wake anyone. The day of the spelling bee, she stood backstage, her shoes slightly too big, her hands shaking. She could hear parents cheering, cameras clicking, confidence filling the room. She felt out of place until the first word was called. Then everything else faded. Each word felt familiar, like meeting an old friend. Shayla spelled calmly, clearly, without rushing. Round after round, students dropped out. Applause grew louder. Judges leaned forward. Mrs. Alvarez watched from the crowd, hands clasped, eyes shining. For the first time in years, Shayla felt seen. When the final word was announced, Shayla closed her eyes, thought of her mother, thought of the dictionary, thought of every night she had whispered letters into the dark. She spelled it perfectly. Silence. Then applause exploded. Shayla won. She didn't understand yet what she had taken from someone else. A title, a label, a fragile pride built on comparison. She only knew that for the first time in her life, hope was no longer imaginary. And no one, not hunger, not cruelty, not jealousy, could take that gift away. While Shayla studied in secret and survived punishment after punishment, her stepmother built a very different world for her own daughter. Money flowed easily there. Private tutors, colorful flashcards, confidence-boosting praise spoken loudly and often. "My child is gifted," her stepmother announced to anyone who would listen, as if saying it enough times could make it unchallengeable truth. Shayla was never mentioned in those conversations. At home, the rules shifted the moment the spelling bee became real. Chores multiplied without explanation. What used to take an hour now stretched into entire evenings. Dishes after dinner. Floors scrubbed twice. Laundry folded and refolded until it was right. Any mistake earned sharp words. Any pause was called laziness. Sleep disappeared quietly. Shayla learned to function on fragments of rest stolen between responsibilities. Her body ached, but she said nothing. Pain had taught her early that complaining only made things worse. When her stepmother noticed Shayla practicing words under her breath, the punishments grew more creative. Extra chores, early bedtimes that were really just earlier mornings. And then one night, the worst blow of all, Shayla came home from school to find a couch cushion stripped bare. Her dictionary was gone. She searched silently, carefully, afraid to be caught looking. When she finally asked, her stepmother smiled thinly and said, "Children like you don't need distractions." That night, Shayla lay awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling a loss deeper than hunger. That dictionary wasn't just a book. It was proof that someone had loved her once. That she had been seen before this life made her invisible. She cried in her sleeve, soundless, until her chest hurt. But pain didn't stop her. It sharpened her. The next day at school, Shayla stayed behind after class. She didn't cry when she told Mrs. Alvarez what happened. She spoke plainly, as if talking about the weather. But Mrs. Alvarez heard what Shayla didn't say. She saw the tight grip on her backpack, the way her eyes lingered on the word list like they might disappear too. Without a word, Mrs. Alvarez unlocked a cabinet and pulled out a thick dictionary, newer, heavier, but solid. She placed it gently in Shayla's hands. "This stays here," she said. "No one can take it." From that day on, their training became deliberate, focused, quietly intense. Shayla practiced during lunch, after school, and whenever she could slip away. Mrs. Alvarez didn't just drill words. She taught Shayla strategy, how to break unfamiliar words apart, how to recognize roots and patterns, how to breathe when nerves try to take over. They trained like time was running out because for Shayla, it was. At home, resentment grew louder. Her stepmother watched Shayla closely now, as if sensing something she couldn't fully name. Any small success Shayla showed at school was met with cold silence or sudden punishment. Meanwhile, her stepsister's failures were softened, explained away, blamed on others. "You're just not trying hard enough," her stepmother snapped one night after Shayla accidentally dropped a plate. Shayla cleaned the shards with trembling hands and said nothing. She learned to study without books. She traced words on her palm. She spelled in her head while washing floors. She memorized patterns, sounds, rules, building a library no one could steal. Exhaustion became familiar. Hunger became background noise. But something inside her refused to break. Every time she was told she didn't matter, she spelled another word correctly in her mind. Every time she was made to feel small, she remembered Mrs. Alvarez's voice saying, "You belong here." The week before the competition, Shayla's stepmother announced that only one child would attend the regional spelling bee. "My daughter," she said firmly. "This family doesn't need embarrassment." Shayla nodded, as she always did. But Mrs. Alvarez had already submitted Shayla's name. Officially, properly. There was no undoing it without explanation, and explanations risked attention. Attention was something her stepmother avoided. The tension in the house became unbearable. The night before the competition, Shayla was kept awake scrubbing floors that were already clean. Her hands were raw. Her eyes burned. "Don't forget your place tomorrow," her stepmother warned. Shayla didn't respond. At school the next morning, Mrs. Alvarez met Shayla at the door. She didn't comment on the dark circles under her eyes or the way Shayla swayed slightly from fatigue. She simply handed her a granola bar and said, "Eat." That small kindness felt like oxygen. Backstage at the auditorium, Shayla could hear the crowd gathering. Parents laughing. Children buzzing with excitement. She felt the weight of everything she had survived pressing down on her shoulders. Then she remembered every night she had spelled words into the dark. Every punishment she had endured. Every moment she had been told she was less. She straightened. This wasn't just a competition. It was survival. When she stepped onto the stage, Shayla wasn't thinking about trophies or applause. She was thinking about endurance, about the quiet strength built from pain, about the truth no one had wanted to see. And as she took her place behind the microphone, calm settling over her like armor, Shayla realized something powerful. No matter what happened next, she had already won the hardest battle of all, the one before the stage. Part 4. The moment that changed everything. On the day of the spelling bee, Shayla stood alone. Not alone in the sense of being abandoned. Mrs. Alvarez was somewhere in the crowd, watching, but alone in the way children learn to be when they've had to carry themselves for too long. Her hands were clasped tightly in front of her, fingers cold despite the warm lights overhead. Her shoes were still a size too big. Her heart beat fast but steady. She was nervous. She was ready. The auditorium buzzed with excitement. Parents leaned forward in their seats. Cameras hovered. Judges shuffled papers. Shayla scanned the room once, then lowered her eyes, focusing on her breathing just as Mrs. Alvarez had taught her. The first round began. One by one, children stepped up. Some stumbled. Some froze. Some misspelled words they had practiced all week. Each time, Shayla waited quietly, repeating rules in her head, grounding herself in patterns she knew by heart. When her turn came, the word was unfamiliar, long, layered, intimidating. Shayla asked for the definition, then the origin. She closed her eyes for half a second, broke the word apart, and spelled it clearly. Correct. Round after round, the field narrowed. Whispers spread through the audience. A few parents exchanged surprised looks. Judges leaned closer to their microphones. Shayla could feel the energy shift, but she didn't let it reach her face. She stayed calm, focused, invisible in the way she had learned to be. Except now, invisibility worked in her favor. Her stepsister was eliminated in the fourth round. The moment passed quietly. No announcement, no drama. Just a bell and polite applause. Shayla didn't look toward her. She didn't need to. She could already feel the tension tightening somewhere in the crowd. Soon, only 2 children remained. Then one. Shayla. The head judge cleared his throat. This is the final word. The auditorium fell silent. Asterisk resilience asterisk, he said. You may begin when ready. The word hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Shayla's chest tightened, not with fear, but recognition. She knew this word, not just its spelling, but its weight, its cost. She pictured sleepless nights, cold mornings, hunger, the couch, the missing dictionary, Mrs. Alvarez's steady voice, her mother's note. Shayla lifted her head. She began, voice soft but steady. E, S, I, L, I, E, N, C, E. She paused. The judge nodded. That is correct. For a heartbeat, the room didn't react, as if everyone needed a second to understand what had just happened. Then the applause exploded. People stood. Cheers filled the air. Cameras flashed. Shayla blinked, overwhelmed, clutching the trophy as it was placed in her hands. It felt heavier than she expected, solid and real. She had won. Her smile came slowly, uncertain at first, then brighter, the kind of smile that hadn't had much practice. And then it disappeared. A sharp sound cut through the noise. Footsteps. A woman was walking down the aisle toward the stage. The applause died mid-clap. Conversation stopped. The judges exchanged confused looks as Shayla's stepmother climbed the steps without permission, her face tight with fury and humiliation. What is this? She snapped. This is a mistake. She pointed at Shayla. She cheated. My daughter is the gifted one. The room went completely silent. Shayla didn't move. She stood frozen, trophy pressed to her chest, confusion flooding her face. She searched the crowd instinctively, for her father, for Mrs. Alvarez, for anyone. Her stepmother stepped closer. Give that back, she hissed. When Shayla didn't respond, couldn't respond, the moment shattered. The slap echoed through the auditorium. Sharp, loud, unmistakable. Shayla staggered back, shock registering before pain. Her cheek burned. The trophy nearly slipped from her hands. A collective gasp tore through the crowd as teachers jumped to their feet and judges shouted for security. But before anyone could move, another voice cut through the chaos. Stop! A man stood up from the back row. Shayla's father. He had arrived late, work clothes still on, grease on his hands, exhaustion in his posture, but his eyes were locked on the stage. On his daughter, on the red mark blooming on her cheek. What did you just do? He asked, his voice shaking. Her stepmother turned, startled. She embarrassed us. She's a child, he said, louder now. And she just won. He walked forward slowly, every step heavy with realization. He looked at Shayla, really looked at her, at the 2 big shoes, the trembling hands, the fear she didn't even try to hide. In that moment, everything he had missed came rushing back. The silence, the distance, the quiet obedience. Security escorted her stepmother off the stage as whispers turned into outrage. Judges called a recess. Parents shook their heads. Phones came out. The moment was already spreading beyond the room. Shayla stood there, stunned, tears threatening but not falling. Her father reached the stage and knelt in front of her. I'm so sorry, he said, voice breaking. I should have seen. Shayla didn't answer, but she didn't let go of the trophy either. Because the moment that had started in pain was no longer just about humiliation. It was about truth. And once truth steps into the light, everything everything begins to change. The slap shocked everyone. For a moment, the entire auditorium seemed to forget how to breathe. Teachers rushed forward. Judges stood in disbelief. Parents clutched their children closer. And at the center of it all stood Shayla, 9 years old, stunned, her cheek burning, her fingers gripping the trophy as if letting go might mean losing everything she had earned. But before cruelty could steal her victory, someone else stood up. From the back row, a tall man rose slowly. He hadn't spoken all afternoon. He hadn't clapped the loudest or leaned forward like the others. He had simply watched, closely, quietly, the way survivors do. He stepped into the aisle as security hesitated. "I'm a sponsor of this event," he said calmly, his voice steady but unmistakably firm. "And I saw everything." Whispers rippled through the room as recognition spread. A billionaire philanthropist, a self-made man whose story, growing up neglected, overlooked, written off, had once filled headlines. A man who knew exactly what silent suffering looked like. He pointed gently toward Shayla. "That child didn't just win a spelling bee," he said. "She survived something no child should." The stepmother tried to speak again, but her words collapsed under the weight of the room's attention. Security resumed their escort, and this time, no one objected. The man approached the stage, stopping a respectful distance from Shayla. He knelt, so his eyes were level with hers. "You were incredible," he said softly, "and very brave." Shayla didn't know what to say. She had learned that adults didn't usually speak kindness without conditions. So she simply nodded. He stood and turned to the judges, then to the audience. "I fund educational programs for children with talent who lack support. I know what it means to be gifted and punished for it at the same time." His gaze swept the room. "This ends today." What followed wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was justice. An official report was filed immediately. Child services were contacted, not with accusations fueled by anger, but with witnesses, recordings, and professional concern. Mrs. Alvarez stepped forward with documented evidence. Shayla's performance, her behavior, her exhaustion, her brilliance. Other teachers added what they had noticed, but never fully understood. Shayla's father listened as the truth unfolded piece by piece. Shame etched itself into his face, but he didn't turn away. For the first time, he stayed. The sponsor arranged immediate legal support, not to punish, but to protect. Temporary custody shifted. Counseling was offered. Boundaries were put in place. The house Shayla feared no longer held power over her future. An opportunity followed. A scholarship was announced, not as charity, but as recognition. Access to schools where curiosity was celebrated. Programs where children were fed, encouraged, and allowed to rest. Mentors who understood that talent blooms best in safety. When the ceremony finally ended, Shayla walked out of the auditorium holding her trophy in her father's hand. The billionaire sponsor paused beside her and handed her a small package. Inside was a new dictionary. On the first page, a note was written in careful ink. "No one gets to decide your worth but you." Shayla smiled. Not the hesitant smile from before, but a real one. She didn't just leave with a trophy that day. She left with protection, with opportunity, with adults who saw her and refused to look away. She left with a future no one could steal. And for the first time in her life, Shayla Thompson didn't feel invisible at all. This story isn't just about a spelling bee. It's about resilience, about a child who refused to break, who carried hope through hunger, exhaustion, and cruelty, and still found the courage to stand tall. It's about how sometimes, when the world feels cruel and unfair, the right person is watching, ready to step in, ready to protect, ready to believe. Shayla's story reminds us that your circumstances don't define your destiny. And no matter how invisible or overlooked you feel today, your moment is coming, a moment that will shine just for you.